My cousin moved back into town a little over a year ago. I want to say maybe April or June of 2018. She has 3 kids, and the youngest is a 5-year-old girl. After they had moved into their new place and were finally settled in after a few weeks, I went to visit along with some other family members. We had an overall good time, a lot of good food and whatnot, and after dinner, I remember my little cousin, who was 4 at that time, wanted to play that cootie game. It was in her room upstairs, and she needed someone to go with her because she was afraid of something. I put it up to her being in a new environment and still getting used to the house. So, naturally, as an adult, I prepared to fight off any escaped Monsters, Inc. characters so she could get her game. We got to her room, and she refused to even set foot in it. And I asked something along the lines of, "Is there a bad thing in here?" She nodded and pointed to the game, and I went to grab it. And then she told me to be careful in that corner of her room. I asked why, and she says, "That's where the screaming lady is. She's on fire and screaming a lot. I don't like her." Hearing this makes my heart drop into my gut like a lead anvil. I quickly grabbed the game and we just went downstairs at that point. As soon as we were back in the living room, my cousin returned to her normal, cheery self and we played some cootie. Later on that night, I asked her mother, my first cousin, if she knew about this screaming lady that her daughter told me about. She said that her daughter refused to sleep in her room until they make the lady go away, and has come to sleep in her parents' bed just about every night since they moved in. No one else has had any weird experiences in the house since moving in, but this 4-year-old girl is beyond terrified on a nightly basis. Well, a month or so passes, and I don't really hear much more about any spooky experiences, so I eventually come to the conclusion that my cousin was simply having very specific reoccurring night terrors or something like that. Cut to yesterday evening, though. It was the birthday for another one of my cousin's kids, so I stopped over to bring him the new Fire Emblem game for the Nintendo Switch. I usually stop over a few times a week to hang out, since it's not far from my workplace. So today, being my cousin's birthday, didn't make my stopping over a rare occurrence or anything like that. We ended up playing some of it. We played some Mario Kart and played some Super Smash Bros, and everything just went pretty well. That is, until later on in the evening. We were waiting for a pizza to arrive, and I was in the kitchen grabbing some soda with my cousin, whose birthday it was. When out of nowhere, we both pick up on the very distant smell of burning. My cousin and her husband came out of the living room and the kitchen, thinking that we had cooked and burned something, but obviously we hadn't. And the house just filled up with this smell, and if I were blind, I would have guessed that I was right next to a massive bonfire, minus the heat. During this time, my youngest cousin, now 5, was taking a nap on the couch in the living room. She suddenly starts yelling for her mum, who goes in to check on her. Everyone else follows, and she's inconsolably crying and screaming, saying, "I can hear the screaming lady in my room. I hear her screaming." So basically, everyone had that same lead anvil heart dropping in the gut moment that I had last year. We went up to her room with her mum staying with her, but when we got there, we saw nothing. But the smell of burning had changed from that of a bonfire to only what I can guess a person smells like when they burn. A heavy waft of just burning hair smell, followed by some other burning smell that I honestly hadn't experienced in my entire life thus far. We quickly went back downstairs and told her mother what we had experienced, and she decided for us to all go outside to the front porch or patio area until the pizza arrived. My little cousin was still hysterical, saying that she didn't want to hear the lady screaming anymore. We tried to calm her, and eventually she seemed to settle down a bit. I'm still scared, but not screaming and crying anymore. We continued to sit there for maybe 10 minutes. My 2 other younger cousins and I were comparing our Pokemon Go collections, and my youngest cousin and her parents were watching some kid-friendly YouTube stuff to distract her. When out of nowhere, everyone hears the most blood-curdling, terrifying and loud scream come from inside of the house's second floor. It must have lasted for maybe 15 or so seconds straight, just multiple long, horrible screams. And after that moment, everything just went dead quiet. My 5-year-old cousin went back to throwing a fit, and everyone else was visibly shaken. I decided that it was time to leave at that point. It was about 9:30 p.m, and while pizza would have been very tempting, I was not hungry in the slightest anymore after that. I thanked them for ordering a pizza, even though I wasn't going to have any, and they wholeheartedly understood. I wished my other cousin a happy birthday and told him not to spoil the new Fire Emblem game for me, and I just went home. I couldn't sleep at all last night, though, and I didn't even turn off my light. I was a tired mess at work today, and I'm still fearful of going to bed tonight. I texted my cousin a few times today, and this evening too, and she said that the burning smell didn't go away until around 4 a.m, and no one slept there last night either, and are looking into getting some kind of help so that they can feel less terrified about their home. I feel terrible for them, honestly, and worse for my young cousin, who has been actually seeing this screaming lady in her bedroom. And I haven't been able to get the smells coming from her room out of my head. I also have been getting hints of them on and off as my day has gone on, and I'm hoping that it's just a residual smell memory and not something more ominous. I still don't think I want to try and sleep tonight, especially not with the light off. It was just such a crazy and scary experience, and I knew that I needed to share it with you guys. I have never experienced something like this in my life, ever. I've had some spooky things happen over the years in the homes that I've lived in, sure, and maybe a few weird things in another family member's home or a friend's place or whatever, but nothing to the point where I've been this terrified. I really hope my cousin and her family can figure out the situation and make their home somewhere that they feel safe again. Do you guys have any advice that I could give them in order to guide them along the correct path in seeking help? This happened when I was probably about 7 or 8. I don't remember all of the details, but I do remember some of the really messed up stuff. So when I was a kid, I lived in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. We lived in those long apartments, the ones that are attached at the sides rather than stacked on top of each other. The front of the apartments faced the main road, and there was a little side street to access the parking in the backyards of the apartments. Behind the apartments was a massive field too, and it was super overgrown, so much so that it was almost like a little forest. And my friends and I used to go back there to build hobbit holes in the grass and whatnot. My mum actually hated it when we went out there because there were some, well, rough people that lived in the neighborhood, and she didn't like a group of 7-year-olds playing out where people also shot up heroin. But anyway, one day I was out in the woods by myself, just exploring and pretending to be Indiana Jones or something. As I was coming out of the tall grass, I could see the little back alley in between the parking and the houses and the woods, and I saw a deer lying in the grass. I thought that it was just sleeping, so I actually crept up on it to try and scare it. I know, not cool, but I was young and stupid. When I got there, though, I just knew that something was off. The deer was just too still, and it just smelled horrible. I couldn't see its face, as its back was facing me, but when I got up to it, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that its entire stomach was ripped open, and all of the insides were just spewed out everywhere around the ground. Now, I wasn't a smart kid by any means, but I knew that this was pretty messed up. When I turned to run back home to tell my mum, I saw a second deer nailed to the tree next to the first deer. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but its 2 front hooves were nailed above its head to the tree, the stomach was also cut open, and the ribs had been broken open to expose the gaping hole. As I stood there, just staring at it, a car drove past on the little alleyway. I remember it was a white car with tinted windows and was driving really slowly. I mean, everyone drove slowly on this alley because, well, there was a residential street, but these people were barely even moving. I couldn't see inside, but I just got the sinking feeling that they were just watching me. Obviously, I couldn't be sure that they were the ones who mutilated the deer, but I'm like 99% sure that it was them. Once they were gone, I booked it home and I told my mum the whole thing. She told me not to go into that field anymore, and after that, I happily agreed. I didn't particularly enjoy seeing a deer's insides, and I would have loved to have just forgot about that whole thing. For the next month or so, though, I just saw that car pretty much everywhere. It would drive up the main road while I was playing in the front yard. It would drive down the back alley when I'd be in the backyard, and I even remember seeing it at the grocery store when my mum and I were shopping. That could have just been another tinted window white car, but they were definitely stalking the house, I know that much. It was always the white car, and always the tinted windows, and always driving way too slowly to be normal. I told my mum about it, but she just chalked it up to just being a neighbour down the road or something. But one day, my mum was out mowing the front lawn. Because of the way the apartments were set up, she had to push the lawnmower around all of the apartments to get to our backyard, and being the helpful little kid that I was going to meet my mum out the back to open the gate for her so she could put the lawnmower in the little shed. As I'm walking out to the gate, I see the car come along the back alley. Normally, the car goes slow, as I've been saying, but as soon as it turned the corner, however, the driver stepped on the gas and zoomed up to me. The back door closest to me opened and someone got out and started running toward me. I don't remember what he looked like, or even if it was a he. I just remember hauling ass back into the house and pissing myself the whole time. After that, my dad yelled at me for peeing myself, and neither he nor my mum believed me about the guy in the car, and I never saw them again after that. And we moved a few months later, too. My parents still think that I made the whole thing up, even though they know how sketchy the neighborhood was. I don't remember anyone going missing around that time in my town, and I didn't find anything when I googled it, but it was really messed up, and I have no idea who those people in the car were, why they mutilated the deer like that, or what they may have had planned for me. I still kick myself for my stupidity during this event. So, this happened during the summer when I was 14, about 16 years ago. My parents had just moved me to this new house that they had built in a rural part of Pennsylvania. It was 2004 and the housing market hadn't crashed yet, so our new house was one of the first in this brand spanking new neighborhood. It was the kind of neighborhood that you drive through and go, yep, these people definitely have money. I hadn't started school yet in my new town, so I had no friends to really hang out with that summer, so I just spent a lot of time just hanging out with my mum, taking drives around our new area and staying up and watching movies and whatnot. One night in early August, though, we had just finished watching something and were getting ready to go to bed. It was one of those summer nights that caused the windows to fog up from the cool air inside. You couldn't see anything out the windows, though, unless you pressed your face to them. As we turned everything in the downstairs off, we saw headlights come down our street. Mind you, it was about 1 a.m., in a brand new neighborhood with about 4 houses in it and maybe 2 more under construction. We didn't have neighbors at this point either, and there was literally no reason for someone to be on the street unless they were A, lost, or B, looking to steal stuff. Well, we hope it's A, and keep going about our business to get ready for bedtime. And then we see the reflection of another light outside of our house, and it wasn't car lights. Once again, we can't see out of our fogged windows, so me being a curious 14-year-old, I walked right up to the front door and pressed my face to the window, and immediately fell right back to the floor, because as soon as I looked out there was a face staring straight back at me. My mum asked me what was wrong, and I just started stammering. Then my adrenaline kicked in. I ran to the kitchen and opened the knife drawer. I pulled out a butcher knife and walked back to the front door. I'm still shaking from basically being nose to nose with a complete stranger, and my 14-year-old brain thought that this was a great idea. I flung open the front door and wielded the butcher knife, and to my shock and surprise, I see not 1, but 3 full-grown men outside. And my dumb ass just ran full speed towards them with a butcher knife over my head. And, luckily for me, they ran. After this, my mother called the police while yelling at me for being such a dumbass, but despite my stupidity in the situation, I've always been slightly proud of 3 grown men being afraid of a tiny 14-year-old girl wielding a butcher's knife. This took place back in 2007. I was 13 years old, and up until then, I hadn't really experienced anything paranormal. I can remember it was a normal summer night, though. I was watching TV, and it was maybe 9 or 10, I think, when I started to hear something, but at first I thought it was just the TV. Then I kept hearing it for the next few minutes, and the more I heard it, the more I realized that it was the faint sound of a baby crying. I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe my sister brought over my nephew or something, and he had a distinct cry when he was younger. So I went out to say hi to them, but there was nobody outside. I kept hearing the cry too, and it sounded like it was coming from the wooded area below our house. I walked maybe 10 or 20 yards into the darkness to see if I could see anything, but nothing. And chills immediately went up my spine, and I ran back into the house. We live out in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. And I told my dad about it the next morning, and he said that my granddad experienced the same thing. Years before, he woke up in the middle of the night to hear a baby crying. He went out to the wooded area and tried looking for it. He spent 30 minutes wandering in the dark with a flashlight trying to find it, but nothing. To this day, I still have no idea what it was that I heard, and I refuse to go down to that wooded area, even though we chopped down most of the trees. Around 6 years ago, my buddies and I had a little tradition of sorts during our senior year of high school where we'd stay out all night skating and exploring all kinds of spooky areas. And this was before any of us had a car too, so everything was travelled by foot. Now, one night in particular, we had ventured out over an hour from our usual exploration areas, and we came across a heavily wooded area that we hadn't been through before. The time had to have been around 2 or 3 in the morning, and just looking into those woods gave me an incredible feeling of unease that I had never felt before. My buddies were determined to go through it though, but I decided against it and instead told my friends that I'd just skate or walk around and meet them at the gas station on the other side. It took me around 30 minutes to skate around the entire area. I waited at the exit of the woods for about 15 minutes before crossing the 4-lane street that led to the gas station, and I asked the clerk if 3 other teens had come in, and he tells me no, so I head back out to wait in the front. 10 more minutes pass before I can hear very heavy footsteps moving quick from behind the gas station's main building. Next thing I know, I see all 3 of my buddies, sweating, out of breath, and looking like they witnessed a murder. We head into the gas station and sit at the small seating area. They then go on to tell me that somewhere halfway into those woods, they heard strange noises behind them, and when they turned around to look, they saw a tall white figure with red eyes staring at them. They said that they freaked out and just took off. As they neared the end of the woods, though, they could hear the leaves in the branches rustling as if it was chasing them. They kept running until they crossed the road separating the woods from the gas station, and once they were at the back of the gas station, they looked back and could see the figure just standing at the edge of the woods, unmoving. The way they described it was that it was only vaguely shaped like a human, more like a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot type creature, but was white in color and had piercing red eyes. Honestly, I had never seen anyone so distressed in the way that my friends were that night. They genuinely seemed terrified, and that night was the last time that they ever wanted to stay out all night again. I still think about this night a lot, even to this day. So when my parents were in college, they went on a trip down to Florida. They had met through mutual friends and were down there together but hadn't gone on a date yet. My dad and one of his friends were planning to meet my mum and some of her friends at a hotel, but being the carefree college guys that they were, they lost track of time and realized that it was impossible to get to the hotel on time by walking. They decided that the best solution to their problem was just to hitchhike, and a car with 2 women picked them up. Everything seemed fine too until the driver asked if it was okay to stop for gas. My dad and his friend agreed that it was no problem since they were making good time, and she drove into a gas station. She then pumped a car full of gas before hopping back in and flooring it, basically stealing the gas with 2 hitchhikers in the back. My dad and his friend were beginning to freak out when she pulled a gun from under a seat and asked, "Are we going to have a problem?" or something like that. My dad and his friend shook their heads vehemently because what else do you do in that situation? And then she drove them to the hotel and dropped them off without so much as a scratch, and they kind of thought nothing of it until the news started reporting on a serial killer in Florida known as Eileen Wuornos. He took one look at her picture and instantly recognized her as the driver. The only reason my dad thinks that she didn't straight up kill them was because they were super polite and respectful to her, and her victims were usually scumbag guys trying to take advantage of her. Let me start by giving a little bit of background. So I'm 23, 5'2" and female. I'm by no means intimidating, even when I try. I work 2 days of night audit for a hotel in a heavily populated area of Houston, Texas, with zero security. And if you know anything about Houston, you know that it can never be good news. With all that being said, last Tuesday, I was alone playing stupid games online and listening to Ryan's Roses to pass the time. Around 1 a.m., this man with a crazed look in his eyes wanders in. I have cameras right next to the desk, and I saw zero movement before the doors slide open, and anyways, he walks up to the desk and refuses to look me in the eyes until I ask him if he's doing alright. He snaps his head up, looks me right in the eyes and says, "No, I am not alright at all." I'm kind of taken aback by this, so I apologize and ask if there's anything that I can do, etc. He declines and then asks if he can get a drink from the little shop next to the desk. I tell him, yeah, of course. Go ahead and get whatever you'd like. The prices are listed there on the wall. Before he walks away to get his drink, he makes sure to tell me, "Now don't worry, I have money. I would never steal from you like that." I didn't really say anything, just kind of smiled at him and nodded understandingly. And well, he wasn't lying. He for sure had money because he handed me 2 bloody dollar bills. So now, all the alarm bells are definitely ringing in my head. He starts apologizing though and asking if I'm mad at him and if he had upset me, and all of which I said, "No sir, I'm not even a little bit upset. It was getting boring in here anyways." I suddenly though became painfully aware of how empty the entire hotel was at that moment. He stands there for a minute, takes a drink, and then makes eye contact for 2 seconds before he tells me that he needs me to call the cops. I start shaking, but somehow manage to not let off that I was absolutely terrified. I get the police dispatcher on the line and begin giving all of the information and our location. Then, from the background, he starts saying that he was almost hit by a car while walking in the middle of the road. The dispatch then asks to speak to him, so I hand the guy the phone and he starts looking around while describing himself. He then stops looking around and looks right into my eyes and says, "Yeah, I'm going to end myself on the freeway." Now, I don't take that lightly, no matter who says it. An audible gasp left my lips and it was like it woke something up in him because his eyes just lit up. He then hangs up the phone and slams it down on the counter in front of my computer and just looks at me. I try to make small talk, asking what's going on and how he's really doing tonight, but nothing. He just avoids those questions and starts asking some questions about the hotel, like, "What is your nightly rate tonight?" He then goes from harmless questions to asking if I'm alone and when my manager will be back and if I lock all the doors around me. And now I'm definitely afraid. I pick up what he's putting down, and I want no part in whatever he was planning if he managed to get me out from behind the desk. I switch gears on conversation and tell him that he is more than welcome to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs in the lobby until the police arrive. He then thanks me and asks me again for the 20th time if I'm mad at him. When he sits down, I get even more uneasy though because he starts looking around anxiously. You know that look someone gets whenever they're working up the nerve to do something, but they just haven't yet? Yeah, that's the look and the vibe that he was giving off at that moment. Around that time, my brain finally pieces together what is actually happening because another guest pulls up right in front of the lobby, and his face immediately drops any excitement, and in fact he almost looks mad. In comes this woman and her son, who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. They came up, no reservations, so it was now a walk-in, which takes a little longer since I have to put in all of her information instead of just checking in and moving along to the next. And her son starts whispering something to her that neither of us can make out. So he says it louder, and then he says, "Mum, didn't we just see him walking around at the hospital?" My blood runs cold, and she tells her son to hush, and locks eyes with me, and I hand her paperwork to sign. She takes that opportunity to secretly ask me if I'm okay, if the police need to be called, and if I'm concerned. I tell her that yes, I'm terrified, and the cops are on their way. I can see him straining to hear what we're saying, so I stop and tell her about breakfast and all that good stuff, and she tells me that she'll not be leaving me alone, that she'll stay with me until the cops come because something just doesn't feel right. And God bless this woman. I'll never forget her face and her heart. After the cops had come and taken him away, mental hospital, I presume, she comes back in from just outside the doors, where she also called the police. She comes up and tells me that they'd just left the hospital up the road visiting her sister and passed him on their way out, where he was wandering around the hospital parking lot with his head down. They came straight to the hotel, but he had beat them here, and he swore that he walked here, but there's just no way that he walked here and beat them. She said that she felt like something was off as soon as she walked in and saw him. She told me that he was likely trying to lure me out from behind the desk, making me feel bad for him, but whatever he was planning, I never want to find out. So let me first preface this with a note. This isn't being shared to be analysed or to have someone pop up and say it was demons or ghosts or otherwise. I do strongly suspect that it was ghosts, but being a skeptic in such things, I can't say 100% sure that that's exactly accurate. It may have been just my child mind interpreting things oddly. Who knows? Also, the location that I describe does not exist anymore, having been destroyed in a highway widening project sometime between 1990 and 2000. So, when I was rather young, in second grade in fact, my family lived in the country, out in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. There were no children for me to play with, and I tended to get a bit more lonely than you'd expect. But when we were in the process of moving out there, parents had this double-wide trailer. There was one incident that took many years to be certain that I hadn't imagined it. While on one of the expeditions to the plot where my family was going to put the trailer, my mother needed to make a stop to use the restroom. With no gas stations for a good 10 miles, Dad pulled the truck down this dirt road looking for a place to stop. And there, maybe 200 to 300 yards from the two-lane road, we found what looked like to be an abandoned gymnasium from a school. Dad decided to use that place as the bathroom, and we headed in. I don't really recall much about the building, though one thing always stuck out in my mind. Near the doors where we entered through was this rather massive pile, or massive in my child mind anyway, of clothing. I remember too, after doing his business, that my father stood at the front of it, looking up at the clothing, and he seemed to be thinking of something, but he never said anything about it. Several weeks later, with the trailer in place, we moved out there and the gym was largely forgotten by me. However, that didn't stop weird things from happening. Well, not weird in the sense of stuff moving around or anything of that sort, but just weird sounds. Within a month or so of living there, I was playing on the front porch when I heard laughter. Now, before I go further though, let me clarify as to where we lived then. The trailer was a good 100 feet back from a dirt road, and across the road was the home of an elderly gentleman that I'll call O. Behind his house was a rather extensive stand of pine trees that reached down to the two-lane highway, probably a distance of 500 to 600 feet total between where I was and the highway. But in any case, as I sat on the front porch my father had built, playing with some of my toys, I just kept hearing laughter. Not one child's laughter either, but several. It sounded to my ears like 5 or 6 kids were playing somewhere, if I had to guess, off behind where I lived. Not having anyone to play with too, I remember wondering where these kids were, and if they'd play with me. Walking up the road, I could tell that the kids seemed to be playing in the woods, as their laughter came and went, and After a moment, I called out to them that I wanted to play too. And as soon as I said that, the laughter just cut off. It was just a dead silence. At one moment there was laughing and fun, and the next it was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. I decided that I'd just scared the kids off, and I just went back inside at this point. This happened several times too, and eventually I just gave up. I'd hear the kids laughing and playing, but they never seemed to get closer, and after a couple of times of this, I remember telling my mother, and she got this really odd look on her face before telling me that she didn't want me playing out front any longer. But we lived there for another year or two before we moved, and I largely forgot about the experience, if I'm being honest. It wasn't until many years later when the story came up again in conversation with my parents. That's when I found some of the story out too, and personal investigation told me the rest. So my mother said that the reason she reacted that way was because she'd heard a rumor that the area that we moved to was actually haunted. She didn't have all the details, but felt that it was tied to the old gym, and all she could say, or would say, was the quote, "Something bad had happened, and she was afraid." After my parents passed away, I kind of forgot the story again, and it always stuck in the back of my head as just something weird, but that was it. Eventually, though, one bored night, I happened to stumble across the website for the church that we had attended. On a lark, I shot an email off to the pastor asking if there had been a gym near where I remembered. I didn't expect to hear back, but 2 months later, I checked my email to find that yes, he'd actually replied. And here is what he related to me. There had been a gym that once stood near where I described, though it had long since been torn down. The gym had been a part of a private school which had stood there from roughly 1900 to about 1979 or 80. And in the early spring of that year, a tornado had gone through and demolished most of the wing of the school, and in doing so, killing a number of students. The building had collapsed, burying the students under the rubble, resulting in the death of a number of them, and I think between 10 and 15 students or something. And after this, it was decided to close the school. As they were demolishing it too, they cleaned out clothing from lockers and various places, dumping it in the gym in the tall pile that I remember seeing. The gym had been left standing because it was hoped that one of the local churches might use it, but given what had happened there, well, it just ended up being left abandoned. Curiously though, the property behind O's house had also been a part of the school's property at one time, being used by the students as a kind of playground area. This did explain why O kept digging up old toys, mostly metal trucks and such, which he gave to me. Looking back though, I've come to the conclusion that what I had been hearing was in some way tied to the old school and the loss of life there. Though I also wonder if in some way it was just my childhood imagination running wild or something like that. That's probably one of the problems that I have with this story too. For all I know, my parents could have mentioned what happened at the school at some point and I just overheard it. And in my lonely state, my mind and imagination may have just run wild. Whatever the case though, I thought that you'd find the story interesting, to say the least. So I was working the evening shift at a gas station, and a man comes in all disorientated. I go to help him out, and he has a huge gash on his head and doesn't know where he is. I couldn't see any crashes around, so assumed that he must have fallen or something. Normally we're supposed to stay inside the glass-shielded register area whenever anyone is in the store, but I, being a nice human being, went to help by calling the police and EMS. They got there and checked him out, and they thought that his head may have been fractured. They took him into the ER, and I just went back to work. The cops stopped back by for some coffee a few hours later, and they told me that the guy had actually been hit by a baseball bat while trying to break into a little girl's bedroom, and was wanted for rape and murder in 2 other states. And well, I never left the register area at night again. So last night, from Wednesday to Thursday, I was home alone because, well, my girlfriend sleeps at her home every Wednesday. And because she doesn't like smoking, I usually smoke on Wednesday nights and Thursday mornings when she isn't with me. I wait for the night so I can go to the garden of my grandma and just smoke without being seen. It's the kind of garden where about 14 people have their own area. I hope you get what I'm talking about. The garden of my grandma is one of the least, completely in the back. Usually when I'm there at night, I just get a chair and watch the night while smoking. Nothing's ever happened before, but last week there was a birthday party of some younger people who may have seen me, but they weren't really paying attention to me, and their party was in the front of this garden area anyway. But last night was very different. So I got my smokes out at home and got my dog and headed to the garden at about 12:30 a.m. Nothing ever really happened there, and I was just looking forward to just kind of relaxing and looking up at the sky and whatnot, and as I arrived there, something was just off. It was the first time that I'd ever been there, and the door wasn't locked. Even last week's party people locked the door while being inside. And well, I stuck in and looked around, seeing if there were any lights on or something. But there was nothing. So in the end, I just thought that maybe the last person just forgot to lock it or something. I walked down the path to my grandma's garden. I bound my dog on a chain about 2 meters in front of me, and I'm just sitting there on a chair facing the path so I would see if someone was coming. Right behind me too, there were some thick bushes and a fence. Behind the fence is about another meter thick bush and tree layer, so you'd have a pretty hard time seeing in from the outside. And well, I made myself comfortable and I began to smoke. Sadly, it was a cloudy day and I couldn't really see any stars. But at some point, I recognized something just out of the corner of my eye. Something was standing behind me, about 1.5 meters high and about 3 meters away to my right. Obviously scared, I just kind of froze and just watched. And as I focused, I noticed that it was a black outline of a little chubby person. His head was sneaking out from the left side of the tree, and then it hid again. The tree is right next to the way to get out of the garden, and on the left side of the tree is my grandma's garden house. It's not that big, but there are 2 windows without glass where you can look inside and outside. And just a few moments later, me still staring back at this dude to my right, I started to see movement to my left coming from the garden next to ours. There's a fence between the garden areas, but I could still see something. And there was another guy, fully black, a humanoid figure, just a little more athletic looking than the other one, sneaking on his tippy toes, walking straight towards me. They were still about 3 to 4 meters away, and my dog must have sensed the person to the left as she was staring right at the person walking towards me. At some point she tried to run away, but the leash didn't let her escape, so she just hid her body behind the corner while peeking her head around. And now this person is just standing there, observing both of us. I turned my head to the left and to the right to see if there was anybody else, but there was no one else, and the person was just standing there, watching me. I panicked and I started thinking, did I just come straight into a trap of some robbers or something, or are they going to attack me? I get myself ready to seem confident and strong, ready to fight if some of them were going to get any closer, when I heard someone walking towards the fence from the outside. As I turned my head to see what was making the noise behind me, I started to see what was going on. I had just been encircled by some sort of void black persons, all watching me from around 2 to 3 meters distance. Someone was standing outside on the other side of the fence, someone to my left and also to my right, diagonally. In every direction someone was watching me, and then I noticed that there were more, and some of them were trying to hide behind bushes, some just standing in plain sight. I tried to shout, "You know I can see you, what do you want?" But I just wasn't as loud as I wanted to be, and for some reason I just felt weak. There was no reaction from any of them either. Some were moving a bit, even trying to hide better behind their covers, but none of them really were good in hiding. There must have been about 8 of them, and I tried to stay calm and just keep sitting in my chair, my dog in front of me just sitting there staring at the second guy, when another person appeared behind the guy from the tree, laid on the floor, and slowly crawled on the floor further to my right. His crawling looked just ridiculous too, and I made a hand gesture to the other people like, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, his crawling was neither stealthy or necessary. And well, I'm sitting there now for about 15 to 20 minutes frozen, just staring back at them. The first person that just appeared just started walking towards me. Me still thinking real humans were behind this whole scenario, I had to rethink. As it was coming closer to me, the black colour of his body, though, just vanished, and it was like a 2D transparent humanoid-like figure. And when I really tried to see them, I could only see the outlines, and even though the person was transparent when looking through the body, it was like looking through fluid or something. I couldn't really see it anymore, just see that it must have stood right in front of me. Every other person still just kept their position. Me just questioning my own sanity. I just ran to my dog and I brought her to my chair. Still being watched by all these figures, I now could also see that someone was standing in the garden house peeking through the window. And I took some deep breaths as I was trying to understand the situation in which I just got myself into, when out of nowhere, something, its body looked kind of like something out of Star Wars, was walking the garden path. It came from the left, the end of the garden, to the right, the garden area entrance, and just before it was going to walk behind the house, it turned itself towards me. It looked like it was holding a laser pointer in its hand or something, sending out orange light, but bigger than a centimeter, pointing straight in my face. But it didn't really blind me, and suddenly, and I can tell you that this was definitely the most scary part, 3 red glowing lights appeared from the head of this thing, and it kind of looked like a helmet. I can tell you that I honestly thought that I was about to be shot at this moment, but to my surprise, nothing happened. Just silence again, and everything just observing me. I really tried to see this thing that was giving off this red light, but it was like the red light was pointing towards me, not letting me see its characteristics. Another 15 minutes went by, me thinking how could I get out of this situation, and my dog already shaking. What's weird too is that my dog usually barks at everyone and everything unknown, but this whole time there was not even one sound. At some point, eventually, I just take my bag and my dog and, walking in a little faster speed than regular, I just walked straight out of the garden. As I was standing up from the chair, the red light disappeared and the person behind the tree to my right just ran away. As I was leaving the garden, I looked around to see if someone was nearby as I headed to the entrance of the garden area, but there was nothing. And gladly, nothing was following me, and eventually, I got home safe. This happened in summer of 2018. I had just finalised a divorce and moved back to my hometown. My parents let me stay at their place until I found my own, and I had just started a high-paying job, but I was in so much debt from the divorce that I wasn't ready to pay for a place of my own. I didn't want to mooch off my parents, so I decided to find a roommate for the interim. I found a sweet woman, Raquel, about 15 years older than me, who wanted someone to move in for only 3 to 4 months with her, and this was perfect for me since I was still paying off my debt. Everything about Raquel was such a delight too. She was sweet, very clean, cared about the environment, volunteered, and would actually cook me food just because. I honestly thought that I had hit the jackpot with her. However, there were a few things about Raquel that were just a little bit off. One, she wouldn't tell me what she did for a living. She said that it was confidential. And whatever her job is, it caused her to be gone for days and sometimes weeks at a time even. I thought that maybe she worked for the government because she had a framed photo of her with Bush Jr. in the Oval Office. When I asked her about it, she said that was my last day before leaving the Secret Service. Even though this was odd, I must admit that I was very impressed. But she also had a very strict rule. Every door in the house, including my room, had to be open at all times if it wasn't being occupied. However, this rule didn't apply to her room. Her door was to remain closed at all times, whether she was there or not, and obviously, I was never allowed to go in, which was strange, but not too concerning, right? And she also claimed to be Wicked. I don't know much about the practice, but she was apparently really into it. She was constantly going to a nearby store and buying all the books and garnishes and whatnot. But besides these few things, she was a very normal person. And a month went by without any concern. But I should quickly mention too that she had 2 cats. They would mostly stay in her room, but when they wanted out, they would hit the door with their paws. My room was right next to hers, so the sound would drive me crazy. If she wasn't home and I heard the cats trying to get out, I would often open her door just enough so that they could run out. I know that this was breaking the rules, but it drove me crazy and I kind of felt sorry for them too. But everything got too weird one night when she was out of town for work. It was the first night of her being gone, and I was sitting in my room just watching TV when I started to hear what sounded like the cats hitting the door trying to get out. I thought, great, she forgot to let the cats out before leaving again. I opened my door to go and let them out of her room when something made me stop dead in my tracks. The cats were just chilling in the hallway. They weren't in the room, but I know that I heard something. Already creeped out, I decided to open her door and peek inside. And what I saw were 4 people, naked, holding hands in a circle, with their heads bowed as if they were praying. And well, needless to say, I noped the heck out of there and headed to my parents. I tried calling Raquel, but I just couldn't get a hold of her. And right when I was about to call the police, she finally called. And man, she was livid. She said that I had broken her only rule and she wanted me out immediately, which was fine by me at this point. But the eerie part was when I got my bed and dresser back, there was a weird symbol carved in the wood that wasn't there before. But the only way I can describe it is like a plus sign, but instead of straight lines, they were kind of curved. Like if someone cut an oval in half down the middle and then tried to make a plus sign out of it. I'm really not sure what it was supposed to mean, but to be honest, I don't think that I want to know. This happened quite a few years back when I was around 14 years old. Let me just preface this too by saying that I had previously been told by my old best friend, Jenna, that her neighbour had some really creepy tendencies. I slept over at her place a lot, but never encountered a creepy neighbour. This guy was married and had children apparently, and his house was directly behind Jenna's place. There was a wooden fence in her backyard too that separated the neighbour's backyard and theirs, and Jenna had a deck and the stairs were a few feet off from the house, so you could fit a fairly small person in between the deck stairs and the house. You could also see into the neighbour's backyard if you were standing on the deck, but not if you were on the grass. So, with that understood, we had half a day at school and I went back to Jenna's place. I wasn't allowed over that day, but since we were inseparable, it really didn't matter, and we weren't expecting her mum to be home from work for a good few hours anyway. Her mum ended up coming home early, so Jenna and I scrambled to the backyard so her mum wouldn't see me, so as not to get in trouble. We went outside and wedged ourselves in between the stairs and the house so her mum wouldn't hear the fence gate open, as it made a lot of noise whenever it was opened. We waited for a couple of minutes until we started hearing shuffling in her neighbour's backyard. But we could faintly see him through the cracks of the wood, and it looked like he was putting out his recycling or garbage or something. Instead, he was making his way onto the bin and poking his head over the fence to look into their windows. From the backyard, you could see into Jenna's mum's window, the bathroom too, and parts of the kitchen. And we saw him, but he didn't see us. But we were shaking and holding onto each other for dear life as we watched our neighbour just stand upright on the bin to get a better view into the windows. He kept shifting from bin to bin to get better angles into what we assumed later was Jenna's mum's room, since she just got back from work and possibly into the bathroom. This went on for 5 to 10 minutes as well, us trembling and trying not to make a move or make noise while her creepy neighbour just kept trying to look into Jenna's house. He eventually got back down and went into a house like nothing had happened, while Jenna and I hopped a fence gate soon after. A few weeks later, we had another incident too where Jenna's sister took a shower late at night and went to her room. Her blinds were open and it was dark outside. There was a tree that sat in the front yard and it was snowing pretty heavily. She called us on her phone saying that she apparently saw someone in the trees and couldn't see them anymore. We told her to turn her light off while Jenna and I did the same in her room, and we peeked out the window but couldn't see anything. We went to her sister's room though and asked what happened, and she was convinced that she saw someone in the tree who she believed was their neighbour. And so Jenna and I went out front to investigate. By that time, he was obviously gone, but we did find fresh shoe prints in the snow that went from the neighbour's front yard to the tree, and right up to Jenna's sister's window before it trailed off back to the neighbour's house. Technically, this isn't my story, it's my mum's, but I'm slightly involved, so I'd like to share it. This happened when I was around 3 or possibly 4, since it was in the summer. My parents and I had just moved into a new house in a safer neighbourhood in order to raise me. And basically, they were looking for new 60s themed furniture for our house, so my mother took to Craigslist to try and find some. She eventually reached out to a man selling an older couch. She had just taken me out of preschool before going to his house, so I was in the car with her. My mother is generally a very intelligent woman, although I'll admit being a first-time mother, this wasn't the best idea. But she had left me in the car because she didn't think it would take so long. He was standing outside of the house and, according to her, seemed like a completely average man, probably in his late 40s. He claimed the couch was in the basement and that they would have to go down there. Apparently, the couch was completely different than the one placed in the ad, so she turned around to ask him about it. And he was sweating out of his mind and apparently just started asking her a bunch of really creepy questions along the lines of, "Are you a virgin? How old are you? And are you married?" My mother left pretty quickly after that and claims that he even chased after her down the driveway. She drove off as quickly as possible and to this day says that she thought that he was going to hit her over the head or something and sell her or something along those lines. This happened on a beach in the Philippines about 2 years ago. Me and my friends decided to take a quick vacation. Found an area where a dirt road led back a half-mile, and then we would hike in another mile or so and set up camp near a creek. Excellent trails were nearby with fun places to explore, not to mention flat ground perfect for setting up camp. Bill and I arrived at our spot around 4 p.m. and got a fire going. We were musicians, Bill a guitar player and me a percussionist, so we sparked up and we started jamming. Around 10, When I was about 12 or 13, my mum and dad owned a tow trucking company. This particular day, they went to our neighbouring state, so I had a few friends over and we were there alone. They probably came over around 12 PM, I'd say, and we were doing all the normal preteen stuff, watching movies, eating junk food, etc. It was winter, so it started to get dark pretty quickly, and we were expecting my mum and dad to come home around 6 or 7. But a little before my mum and dad were supposed to be home, there was a knock on my door. The way my house is set up, the front door was right next to my living room couch where all of us were hanging out. My mum is kind of known for being stuck in the 80s. She always wore a leather jacket, and one of my friends, Tina, looks through the door of the window and says, "It's your mum, I can see her jacket." I jump up immediately and look through my window, and it's pretty dark at this time, and I don't see my father's tow truck. I run to the front door screaming to Tina, "Don't answer the door, it's not my mum," but I was too late. She opens the door, and here comes this 6-foot, 250-pound man with a black stocking over his face, running through my door. All of my friends ran out of my living room to the kitchen where the back door is located and just ran away. Me, on the other hand, I obviously learned that day my fight or flight or freeze is to freeze. This man grabs a hold of me and picks me up in the air, and I was so scared, and I actually peed myself. I kind of don't remember how it happened, but I managed to escape his grip though, and I ran out of the back door down the block to a neighbour's house. We called the cops, and within a couple of minutes there were 6 cop cars, 3 on each end of the block. Eventually, we come to find out that it was my grown-ass neighbour. He allegedly was just playing a trick on us. A bunch of little girls, right? To this day, I'm 26 now. Whenever there's a knock on my door, I literally creep around my house so that people can't hear or see me, and I hide until they're gone. Our asshole neighbour did eventually get in trouble too. The cops didn't believe him, obviously, and there was a bit of back and forth between us and the courts and whatnot, but in the end, I don't actually know what happened to him. All I can say is that I sure hope nothing like this ever happens again. So I worked at a retail company, and I've been there for about 4 months now. About a month ago, we got a new worker, Jack, who works in the back. As I continuously go back and forth from the storefront to the break room located in the back, I'm quite friendly with all the guys working back there. I never saw Jack before, and I figured that he was new, and I decided to smile at him and said hi. I continued to do this every now and then when I saw him, and we would always have the same lunchtime, so we would spend the time just idle chat and break room and all that sort of stuff. Now, this was all fine and dandy, but I do like my personal time, and Jack would just talk and talk to me, even when I was on my phone, and obviously gave clues that I wanted to just be left alone. I thought that this was just annoying at best, and he then one day started to buy me candy, offer me his food, and then talked about this soup that he was going to make and ranted on about how amazing this soup would be. I just kind of acted interested with an "oh cool," and he asked if I wanted to try some multiple times. I just dismissively said sure, so he would leave me alone and didn't think anything of it. He then started to make me uncomfortable though with all the offering of the food and the candy, and always asking about my personal life too. He asked me how my relationship with my dad was, and I was naive and told him that he wasn't in the picture, but didn't give too much detail. He then started talking about how he wants more kids and how he wants to find a young woman to give him more kids and stuff like that. To be honest, I was getting creeped out at this point and was constantly dismissive with him. I did ask him how old he was because he looked young, maybe 30 at most, and he said that he was 43 though. That had alarms ringing for me in my head on why he kept pestering and talking to an 18-year-old non-stop about kids and how he loves the female body and whatnot. The last straw, though, on pretending to be nice to this guy was when, before I clocked out to leave, he rushed to me and told me that he had a present for me. I didn't know what the hell this guy had, but he decided to pull out a bouquet of fake roses and gave them to me. They were obviously cheap and had "Congrats Grad" on it, even though everyone knew I graduated high school last year, and it was just really weird. He told me that it was because I worked so hard, and at first I thought maybe he was just doing this in some sort of a fatherly, caring way, but putting two and two together with my mum, I knew that he was flirting with me. I threw them in the trash when I got home, disgusted that a grown 43-year-old man who knows that I was 18 would talk about a woman's body with me and give me roses like this in a flirtatious way. After that, I would text my mum any time that we had lunch together, which is almost always the case, which drove me crazy. So her and I would sit in the car and I would eat to avoid him. Things were going good, and I just ignored him from then on and avoided eye contact, barely talking to him anymore. And I think he sort of got the hint eventually, and this is where the story should end, but it got worse than I could ever imagine. So Jack was starting to act up at work, cussing and acting too comfortable around his co-workers. I was closing up yesterday night with my supervisor, and she mentioned it, and we began talking about Jack. She mentioned how things are really bad with him, and I don't even know half of it. I told her about how he gave me roses, and she was honestly shocked. We both went into the office to cash me out and talked in private about it too, and she said not to give my phone number, in which I replied that I would never, since he was a creepy man who wanted to fuck an 18-year-old girl. She said that her and Jack had went on a couple of dates together and kissed like twice, and he began sending her pictures of his, well, man area without any warning. I was kind of disgusted and found out that he was also talking to her, asking her to have babies and marry her and whatnot. She told me that he was married 3 times and also told her about how he had a domestic abuse case in the past. So, apparently, this guy beats up his wives. She then showed me how he would like snap and call her a fat C and all this crazy stuff, and that the soup that he wanted to give me so badly, he and her made it together for their first date. She said that she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, and I agreed with her. But again, I wish the story ended there, but it got worse. She started shaking and crying, talking about this at this point, and she said that he had apparently been in jail before. I knew that though, because he had told me about his drug dealing past in the 90s and how he changed and everything. But she told me that he was arrested and put on trial for first-degree murder. I was shocked to say the least. She started crying even more, saying how he knows where she lives and she has a son since she invited him over to watch a movie with them. I told her to report him for some abusive texts and inappropriate pictures, but she insisted on not because he knows where she lives and she lives with a minor son. But shit gets even crazier when she texts me the court case she found of him online. It says that he and his friends were in an argument about drugs and he pulled out a gun and said that he was going to kill everyone in the apartment. But reading this honestly made my heart sink. He was an average guy at first and didn't seem super violent, but now that I knew this, that he could just flip on a dime, I was kind of scared. Continuing to read the report though, it said that him and another guy chased down one of the other dealer friends and shot him twice in the head at point-blank range. Jack was apparently put on trial and his friend who was involved in the murder was sentenced, but his sentence was reversed due to lack of evidence, even though a witness did say that he was there when the shots were fired. He definitely did do it, in other words, but somehow got his sentence reversed or something. My poor supervisor is so stressed and scared, thinking that if she gets him fired, he'll legit come to her house and kill her and her son in cold blood like he did with his supposed friend. One chilling thing that she told me was, while Jack was at her house with him, her son talked about guns and he mentioned how he used to have a 9mm gun that he loved. I told her that I'll come with her to our manager and tell her about all this inappropriate stuff that he'd been doing. Mind you, he hasn't physically threatened her yet, but has definitely said some pretty mentally abusive shit over text. And now knowing how crazy and bipolar this guy can act, it's pretty scary. He recently told me that I was mean, and I just laughed it off, but who knows what this guy is thinking when he says that someone's mean. And he still has me on his radar of girls that he wants to fuck, and it's honestly terrifying. I've actually been waiting to quit this job for a while since management is so shit, and now knowing my manager hired a murderer full well knowing his criminal past, I'm out of here at this point. A man who shot another man blank point range twice in the head, gave me flowers and was trying to make me have kids with him. And one of the worst parts about this is that the manager loves Jack. She was even talking about promoting him to supervisor as well. He's been disrespectful to multiple supervisors, is texting profane and abusive texts, and has sent dick pics to my supervisor. I really do hope that he gets fired, and I hope my supervisor gets a restraining order or something to keep him away, because he's obsessed with her. I mean, I was just his second option, and I was good at deflecting him, thank God. And so, I'm quitting my job soon. Too much stress, and I cannot look at that man anymore without feeling legitimate fear and queasiness, knowing what he has done and how he treated my supervisor and I. I hope that I never have to see him again because he is so unstable, and who knows what he could do. I do need the money, but this isn't worth it. So I just moved into this house about a month ago now, and it's new. And there have already been about 5 different attempted break-ins now. The first night in the new house, I was upstairs with my wife, and I went downstairs to grab something and saw a light move across the room. I didn't think too much of it and wrote it off as a reflection from someone's headlight shining through the window or something, but the next night it happened again. My wife and I were upstairs again and both saw a light shining up the staircase. The only possible way that this could happen is if someone was either in our house or backyard, as we have a 6-foot privacy fence, and given the location of our staircase inside the house, it was impossible. I grabbed my gun and told my wife to lock herself in the bedroom and I'd call her when it was safe. All the doors were locked still, so no one was inside. However, the side gate was open. I called the cops, but since we live outside the city limits, we're under jurisdiction of the county sheriff, which means that their response time is about 30 to 60 minutes. After they arrived, they took my statement, and my wife and I went to get a lock for the side gate. About 3 days later, I leave to grab some snacks for a movie night with the missus, and she calls me about 5 minutes later, asking if I'm downstairs, and accidentally locked myself out. And I wasn't. I drove back home as fast as I could, but by the time that I got there, no one was there. This pattern has happened 4 more times now too. I leave, and 5 or 10 minutes later, my wife calls asking if I'm outside, so whoever this person or people are, they're definitely watching our house. Oddly enough, these events never happen when I'm at work though, only when I'm home for the night and then leave again. The most recent incident was the night of Thanksgiving though, and my friend and I left to go grab some alcohol for the after-dinner party, and my wife calls saying our 3-month-old puppy is going berserk, barking at the front door and growling, and she can hear people talking outside and someone actively trying to pick the lock. She said that she tried to call 911 but was put on hold. So my friend calls as we're driving home, and we pull up about 2 minutes later and no one's there, but I do hear a car start down the road and tires squeal driving away. And there are some pretty gnarly tool marks all over our deadbolt, like they tried to use a knife to get in or something. The cops came 45 minutes later, took a statement and left, and nothing against the police in the area, but their response time is really a bit disheartening. I have since installed cameras by the front door and side gate, and have a security system being installed on Wednesday. The police say it's just people looking for empty houses to loot appliances from because we're in a new development and all, and I don't buy it though. None of my neighbours have reported anything happening to them, and our house is very clearly lived in. And a scary thought has crossed my mind that maybe they're not targeting to steal things. Maybe they're targeting us as people. To be quite honest, I feel like a prisoner in my own house, and I just don't know what to do. Do you guys have any ideas? I used to live in a very small town that was predominantly safe for kids. Only had some drug issues, really, and my house was located in a small and upscale part of the town, which mainly housed families. There was a small pond with lots of green in the neighborhood that was about a 5-minute walk from my house, I'd say. To get to the pond, you had to go down a grass hill. The neighborhood kids, including myself, would always go down to the pond for hours to catch frogs and skip rocks and all that good stuff. So, on this particular day, it was raining and pretty cold, so there were no other kids at the pond. My best friend, her brother, who was 1 year older than us, and myself decided to head down to the pond for a bit. After about half an hour, we see at the top of the hill a minivan pull up. We didn't think anything of it because there was a neighborhood mailbox at the top of this hill, as well as a lot of people stopped there to get their mail. A man started to get out of the minivan, and I remember him being older, probably in his 60s, and another note too is since we lived in a small town, everyone kind of knew everyone, or at least could recognize everyone, and I remember thinking that it was strange that I'd never seen this man before in town or in the neighborhood. He got out and just stared at the three of us for what seemed a pretty long time. All of a sudden, he yelled at us and said, "It's not safe down there, you kids better come up here." My best friend and her brother looked terrified, and I had this gut feeling that something just wasn't right. We didn't say anything back, and he continued to repeat the phrase, "It's not safe down there, you kids better come up here." Now, there was nothing unsafe about what we were doing or where we were standing or anything, so the whole request was really strange, but it started to become more like an order than a request. And our fight or flight reaction kicked in, and we all booked it up the other side of the hill, which was only about a few meters away from him in the minivan. As soon as he saw us running, he got into his minivan too and started driving slowly behind us. He was literally following us too until he reached my house. Luckily, my garage door was open and my parents' 2 cars were parked inside. We hid behind one of the parents' cars and watched as he pulled to the side of my house and parked. My parents were inside, but obviously had no idea what was happening. He stayed parked in front of my house for a couple of minutes until my dad came outside to take out the trash and saw the 3 of us hiding. I guess the man saw my dad and drove away, but as soon as he left, we told my parents everything. Even until this day, 12 years later, my parents still think that we were just being overdramatic and that it was a man that was just genuinely concerned for our safety, but because of the weather. Nonetheless, we weren't allowed to go back to the pond anymore, and I don't blame them for thinking this though, because the 3 of us tended to work things up a bit and be a bit dramatic. But on this instance, I knew from the way that I had that strange feeling when I first saw him at the top of the hill that something was just off. And to this day, I still believe that he was planning something. I'm sure many people know now that a shooting took place at Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day this year. I was a junior at the time, and I've been at Douglas since the beginning of freshman year. Now it's my senior year, and seniorities is really kicking my butt, but anyway, here's the story. So it was Valentine's Day, like I said, where I could see some people holding Valentine carnations and teddy bears while walking between classes and whatnot. I really didn't care much about the whole event, but secretly I did kind of hope to get something from some friends of mine. We had a mandatory fire drill in the morning, important to know, like the school board requires us sometimes to do. Time passed and it was on to the 3rd period, which was my study hall class, or personalization as the school says. There I would do some homework and surf the web on my phone. I suddenly had the urge to go into the bathroom near the end of the class. Sometimes I go into pee in 3rd period and sometimes in 4th. But keep this in mind too. So then I walked to my 4th period class, which is in the 1300 building, or the science building as we call it. You can see in pictures that it's about 10 to 15 meters away from where the 1200 building, aka freshman building, was. A very, very short walking distance, in other words. I go in my physics classroom where we finished a virtual lab experiment, and it was near the end of class, and I looked at the clock, pondering if I should go to the bathroom again because I drank a lot of water today. It's kind of a hassle to go to the bathroom in this class actually, because every time I go pee in the 1300 building, the bathroom is always locked, so I walk over to the freshman building to do my business instead. And even sometimes the first floor bathroom is locked because of drug usage. Douglas is literally called a pot school by others. So I climb up the stairs to go to the second floor. But just this time, I decided not to go because, well, school was almost out anyways. The fire alarm rings, red flag number 1, which I thought was super weird because we already had a fire drill in the morning. It was probably culinary class again, so I didn't pay much attention and walked out the door to my designated area with my classmates like fire procedures had us do. I left my backpack behind and just took my phone with me, and then I heard the sounds. I stopped walking, 3 steps away from the door, and looked in the direction of the freshman building. Fireworks? Is this some sort of simulation? Who would set up fireworks at this time? Suddenly, I had a very bad feeling wash over me, and my heart started to race, and in the back of my mind, I thought that maybe there could be gunshots. Yet, I was still in denial because Parkland is a really safe community. I mean, this is a place where upper middle class people reside and where crime rates are really, really low. I was just standing in the doorway wanting some sort of confirmation that, yes, this was happening when I heard it again. My mind went absolutely blank at this point. It was like someone took control of my body and flipped my fight or flight switch on. I turned away from the direction of the freshman building, went back in the classroom and bolted toward the fire escape door out in the back. I had a couple of students follow me too, but they turned back at the last second to stay in class. I didn't really care though, I just wanted out at this point. Once out the door, I encountered a class who was out in their area and also thought that it was just a fire drill. And suddenly, it just occurred to me that I just ran out of the classroom when I wasn't supposed to. That was seriously my first thought when I was outside. I started to walk back in the direction to my class to follow the procedure because, yes, my dumbass thought nothing serious was happening. And more gunshots ran out in the air, which I still thought were fireworks, but I decided to stay in place with the group. Usually during fire drills, administrators would drive around in their golf carts to check out on teachers and students and whatnot. I saw one a couple of meters from me, and I was about to walk up to him to say that I was lost when he just suddenly drove away super fast. Multiple police cars came around the corner with their lights flashing, and a helicopter flew above me too, and that's when I knew that things were really serious. I could still hear gunshots really close too, so I ran somewhere to the edge of the school that had fences and was near the football or baseball field. I didn't know what path I specifically went. All I knew is that I was yeeting out of there quickly. I tried climbing up the fences like other people were doing to escape, but I'm not athletic enough, and I just slipped down like a loser. Suddenly, a chubby freshman limped up to where I am, and a small group of people, saying, "Help me, I've been shot." He cried out with tears running down his face, and I looked at his leg, and there was a gaping red bullet hole in his ankle and splatters of blood just everywhere around it. And maybe even a peak of white that was his bone, I think. My eyes were wide open at this point, mouth practically hanging open. Someone next to me said that it looks fake, and he was still crying for help, but we were just frozen solid. Suddenly, an adult male came out of nowhere and directed us to go run and hide where a middle school nearby was. No one was doing anything to save the poor boy, so I marched up to the guy and yelled out at him, "A person is shot." He legit did not hear me though, so I practically spit in his face again that the boy was shot. Finally, he said, "What and where?" Still hearing the gunshots that were directly behind me, I pointed at the boy and then proceeded to sprint across the football field with my heart pounding out of my chest. Halfway across the field, I called my mum in hysterics, saying that there was a shooting. She didn't understand what was going on and was confused because school wasn't out yet, and finally she understood and started yelling that I should run away as fast as I can, obviously. From my dad's point of view, her voice was apparently so loud that the neighbor came over and asked what was happening. Eventually, I walked across to Walmart and to the Bank of America where they picked me up. I think the aftermath was the hardest part. When I got home, I was really calm, like nothing ever happened. And I only broke down crying when I was called by my older sister who was in another high school when she heard the news. In the afternoon and supper time, I was joking around and laughing like I normally was. Basically, I was just in absolute denial. The day after, I was in my shared bathroom with my sister on Twitter while brushing my teeth, and I looked at the names of some of the victims and saw some faces that I knew, and I just had a massive breakdown. So many what-ifs came to my mind. What if I went to the bathroom during fourth period like I would sometimes do at the end of the class? I legit probably would have been gunned down. What if the shooter did manage to successfully break the windows and shoot from there? I would have been smack dab in his line of sight when I was outside the 1300 building just standing around. 2 weeks later, I returned to the school to reclaim the nest, the principal called it. What I didn't know was that one of the victims was in my psychology class, and I never knew that she existed till now. I kept looking at the empty desk that was once hers, and every time I did, I felt numb inside. My teacher would later put a flower pot on her desk every day in her absence. Then in my statistics class, there was another victim, which meant another empty desk. My stats teacher asked with tears in his eyes for us to reshuffle our seating arrangement around because he didn't want to look at the empty desk any longer. Still to this day, I have nightmares of being involved in shootings and would be scared of loud noises, basically PTSD. But throughout the couple of months as information was coming in, I would learn that my sister used to go to school with the shooter. But she described him as lonely and weird. Additionally, my male friend got death threats from him and would send him pictures of guns, threatening to shoot him. Yes, he did report him before, but administrations didn't do anything, and also he later testified in court. Also, I think I do know the identity of the boy who got shot in the ankle, but I'm not 100% sure. Apparently, the guy that I screamed at was an off-duty police officer who helped wrap the boy up, and the boy gave him a good description of the shooter that was a massive help. I'm not going to confront him though, because I don't want to bring up bad memories anymore. Things still aren't back to normal in Douglas, and it never will be until perhaps once the freshmen who were there that day graduate. There's always some sort of tension in the atmosphere, as if something major was going to happen. Lately, a lot of fire alarms have been going off, and every time it does, everyone would just go silent. I sincerely hope that no one would have to go through what my school and I did, but I know shootings will keep happening because that's the American way, right? And finally, I hate seeing or hearing his name, but the person who did this was Nicholas Cruz. So, I don't even know where to start, to be honest, but my house, which I rent, has a ground floor and 2 floors, so 3 in total. I was getting ready to go out, and I went to the first floor, in my room, to get my makeup, and went to the second floor in my flatmate's room to do my makeup there. I go back in my room around 45 minutes later, and I see 3 of my purses on the floor, and the shoulder handle, I'm not sure if that's the word, has been cut on 2 of them and a bit on the 3rd one. Both purses are cut the same way in 2 spots. I start getting a bit freaked out because no one is in the house except me and my flatmate, and we've been together the whole time upstairs. In the living room, which is on the ground floor, we left the back window door open to air out the room as we had some people over the night before. The door in the living room leads to a tiny garden which is protected by a tall fence, which is more protected by another wired fence, and I doubt anyone would be able to just climb on it and come in. Cut purses, mind you, and take no money or cards from them and then just leave. The complex has 8 flats, so all the tiny gardens are connected in a long line, but we are only connected to 1 as we're the last flat in the line. So absolutely nothing was stolen or even moved, and we see no marks anywhere, but it's still weird, so we called the police to find an explanation. The police come and check the evidence. There's also a wet spot on the carpet in the room about 5 centimeters long, and how the purses are cut. We ended up concluding that it must have just been a fox that went into the house, went upstairs, ate the bags and left, based on the fact that a fox tried to enter the living room one time the same way a few weeks back. But the police said that it was not an animal cut. It's most probably a knife cut, and asks if we've had any problems with anyone, like an ex or something. We haven't, and most people don't even know where we live. And no one really knows how to get to my room, as the house is pretty complicated. The stairs in the house are metal and spiraled, and you basically hear it from every spot in the house too if someone is on the stairs. Police call forensics to ask for evidence and whatnot, and forensics say that they don't know what they can do as they can't take any fingerprints off the bags because of the texture, and the wet spot is apparently dry by now. Police said that they've never heard of something like this before and that it makes no sense, so it must be a ghost or something. Who says that, right? Anyway, they marked it off as a burglary and then they just left. I should mention, though, that the night of the morning before, we had the music pretty loud and our neighbour texted us pretty angrily to stop the noise. I mean, he does know the house as we have the same structure and he was the only one with the easy access, but he's like 75 years old and all the encounters we've had so far, he's been really nice. So, we've been left with something or someone coming in our house through the back garden that's protected by very high walls and wired fencing, entering the living room, passing by the PS4, the TV, expensive speakers, goes into the hallway, passes by very expensive shoes, goes up the stairs, enters the bedroom, cuts the handles to my purses, does not take absolutely anything, makes no noise, and then just leaves. Obviously, I slept in my flatmate's room last night after everything, and today I went into the bedroom to clean it, and I actually found one of the missing handle pieces in my bed, under the blanket. I don't know what's going on, but nobody has any explanation, and this whole situation is just really creepy and weird. Also, today, after one day that I wrote this, I was putting my shoes on, and I picked up something from the shoe chair, and another piece of black crocodile print leather just fell out from underneath. This is at the hallway shoe section on the ground floor. I thought that it was another part of the black bag, but I realized it was a part of my flatmate's black leather boots. So that means that this person or animal also cut one piece of one boot. It's not her, those are definitely her favorite boots, and then they just hid it where they did. So far, they've cut a black crocodile print purse and a snake print purse, but today we found a black piece of crocodile boot. Same material, different parts of the house, and we also got a bottle of wine from our neighbour to apologise for the noise, and I saw him today by accident. He thanked us for the wine and seemed generally nice, and as if he got over it. We did this so that we can start talking again and ask if anything weird like this has happened and explain what happened to us. And he said exactly this. Nothing happened. Thanks for the heads up. I don't know what's going on, but I'm feeling really on edge. Either there is a ghost in our house and something paranormal is going on, or there's someone sneaking into our house somehow and they're doing some really weird shit. I'm not sure if this was a trendy thing for anyone else in the early to mid-2000s, but when I was a child during this time, it appeared that many characters in books and films and TV shows had pen pals, distant figures with whom they were best friends and to whom they scribed whatever was going on in their lives. One of these TV shows, Grange Hill, actually featured an episode where a girl met up with a pen pal, who turned out not to be a French boy her age, but a creepy middle-aged man who shoved her in the back of his van. Apparently, I didn't let that sway me from seeking out a pen pal of my own. Anyway, I searched pen pals on Google and clicked on the first few sites. The one that I settled on already had a list of children's names, ages, locations, small bios, and an email address too. I scourged the page, but couldn't find anyone my age. The youngest girl was Lottie, age 12, from Amsterdam. So I clicked on her email address and tapped out a cheerful message telling her that I was from the UK and that I was only 8, but I was really mature for my age and please be my online friend. I remember she responded pretty quickly, and I remember that she told me that it didn't matter that I was only 8.
She liked younger girls better anyway. Retrospectively, that was creepy as hell to say, but I was 8 and naive. So, we struck up a friendship and we would email back and forth. I told her everything about my annoying friends at school, my parents fighting, my love for Jacqueline Wilson books and Doctor Who. Like the idiot that I was, I told her the country I lived in too and the town. I didn't give her my address, but I was stupid enough to send her a picture of myself. She didn't send anything back, and I didn't think to ask because, once again, I was an idiot. She told me that I was really pretty. Things are a little bit fuzzy to remember, but one thing I do remember is that she said that she liked my eyes. A few weeks of this goes on, and my older sister was the only person who knew, and she told me one day that she wasn't comfortable with this. Because she's only older by a year, though, I thought I knew better and brushed her off. But she asked me to tell our mum, and I didn't want to, but I had a feeling in my gut that I should. And so, that evening, I told her. Putting on my most persuasive voice, I tried to convince her that Lottie was really cool and nice. But my mum is protective, and she knew straight away that something was wrong. She asked to see the emails and told me, and Lottie isn't a girl. She's a man preying on me. Mum pointed at the typing style and the email address. She doesn't even talk like a little girl, she said. You see, Lottie's email address wasn't simply like @hotmail.com or @gmail.com or something like that. It was at something that, according to Mum, looked like a business name, not something that a little girl would have an email with. Her writing style had also changed over the weeks that we'd been talking. It had gone from normal to typing in slightly caps and slightly lowercase, and this didn't give my mum a good feeling. She told me to stop emailing Lottie, and I lied and I said that I would, but naturally I carried on. I must admit, though, that I was a little bit unnerved now. I emailed Lottie a few days later saying that my mum wanted her mum's email address. She started questioning me why when she replied, but eventually gave it. I was relieved, and in hindsight, I should have wondered why she didn't want to give me the email address straight away anyway. Maybe I realized this a little subconsciously too, because I actually asked her for a photo of her and another with her mum. Again, she questioned why and asked if something was wrong, and I just told her that my mum wanted to know what she looked like. There was no reply for a few days, but then finally I get an email of her. Attached were 2 pictures, one of her and one of her with her mum. But they just didn't look right. They didn't look like a normal photograph, if you know what I mean. They looked really polished and professional. And I think by this point, the unsettling feeling was just too much for me to handle. I'm not good at shutting things down with someone, and even to this day, I can't calmly and slowly end a relationship or friendship, so I replied to the email with the pictures and just wrote that I never wanted to speak to her again. Lottie didn't take it very well. Not well at all, actually. She told me that she hated me and that I was ugly, and she said a few other nasty things, but what freaked me out was when she told me that she would make me as miserable as I made her. You can guarantee that if I wasn't scared before, I was shitting myself then. I cried and told my mum, who was pissed about me lying but worried as well, so I guess when she banned me from using the internet for a few weeks, it was actually a protective measure as well as a punishment. But nothing did happen in the end, and this made me think that maybe I'd freaked out on Lottie for no reason. Maybe she hadn't lied. It was only a year and a bit later when I finally stumbled upon a new show and found out that those pictures, they weren't Lottie after all. Does anyone else remember an Australian show called Mortified? Well, the photos that she had sent were actually headshots of the lead actress, Marnie Kennedy. So Lottie, I don't know who you are or what your intentions were, but I'm glad that my mum stopped me from seeing you. So this happened a few weeks ago. I recently graduated from college with a degree in biology, but decided to take a minute for myself before applying to medical school. My school was in a dangerous area, and I still rent in the area because my roommate is a master's student at the same university. We live about 5 blocks off campus on a street where you would not want to be caught alone at night. So one day, I was by myself in our apartment just jamming to some tunes, and I heard a banging on the door. This was odd to me because my apartment is a row home style apartment with 2 other apartments below me and a front door, which I had most certainly locked behind me when I entered the building about 10 minutes prior. It was also concerning because I'm a 5-foot-tall woman and currently alone. Since we live on the top floor, nobody but my roommate and I are ever up on the 3rd floor, and I had not recently submitted a maintenance request or anything. I turned the music off and I sat still for a moment waiting to see if it happened again, and the banging started once more. Now, I recognized that this was pretty stupid, but I walked to the front door and opened it the tiniest crack to see a really large, dirty, heavy-set man with a beard on the other side. I asked, "Can I help you?" and he looked at me in the eye and said, "I'm here to fix the air conditioning leak. You need to let me inside the unit so that I can make the repairs." My management company only has one regular maintenance worker who I was familiar with, and I'd never seen this man standing at my door previously. He took a step forward while I quickly said "wrong place" and slammed and locked the door. Initially, I wasn't too concerned because maybe he was just in the wrong place, right? But I emailed my landlord to ask about maintenance reps in the area, to which she replied, "The company had an HVAC technician out today, but none to your address. What did he look like?" After describing him as a large, heavier white man with a full beard, she responded, "That was not our HVAC rep. He's a small, thin man. I'm not sure who was out there." And now I'm worried about my safety because clearly someone has keys to our building, and even my management company can't account for who he may have been. They will also not change the front door lock, so I'm kind of on my own with this one. I'm all ears if you guys have any ideas on how to keep myself safe. A few years ago, my roommate and I lived on the 3rd floor on the backside of an apartment building. She was in the process of moving out though, so it was mostly just my dog George Washington and I. I knew just about every neighbor in my building, and from what I knew, they were pretty super chill. In order to understand this story, I need to explain the way my apartment was set up. In order to get to the door to enter our apartment, you would have to pass by my window, which was a very long window in my bedroom. I had never had any issues until about 2 a.m. on a Saturday, well, technically a Sunday. I heard footsteps on the walkway outside my window, and I saw a shadow pass it. I usually am a pretty groggy person when I first wake up, but ever since it had just been me, I was more aware of my surroundings, so it kind of jolted me awake. I had a nightstick under my bed, so I grabbed it and debated about what to do for the next 30 seconds. I opened up my bedroom door quietly, right in front of our main entrance, and started to notice the hand jiggle ever so slightly. Clearly, at this point, I knew I could either A, shit my pants, B, get attacked, or C, scare the person off. Choice A seemed to be the most likely for my personality type, but choice C it was. So I turned on the outside light and kicked the outside door as loud as I could and screamed a string of words that would make a sailor blush. I heard footsteps turn and quickly walked the other way, and I called my stepdad, who thankfully lived close by. He came by to check on me and wanted me to stay with him, but I said that I would be fine, and off he went. The next morning I got up and got ready for church, not really thinking of the night before. I returned home shortly after and was texting on my phone as I reached to get my keys and put them into the lock on my front door. I couldn't find the keyhole though, so I looked up and noticed that my entire lock had been bashed in. It hadn't really set in what had happened yet, so I opened the door and looked in, and a lot of my stuff was gone. Televisions, computers, jewelry, but luckily they left my doggo there and he was unharmed. The irony though is that I got him to be my best friend and a guard dog. He fulfills one of those roles, and I'll let you figure out which one. My brain caught up with my surroundings though, so I grabbed George and ran outside to call the police. They came out, guns drawn, as they cleared my apartment, and it felt surreal to talk with forensics in my own residence. They never found out who did it, and in the end it worked out okay. A lot of the jewelry they stole was from an ex that I had intentions of pawning anyway, and renter's insurance covered that, so I got some sweet new technology upgrades. However, I still am very unsettled internally about that night and day, particularly about that night. I replay it and often wonder what would have happened had I have not woken up, or if the person wouldn't have been so easily turned away. It also is very unsettling to know that they were watching me, waiting to leave for church, so that they could break in. Ever since that day, I keep my head on a swivel and pay extremely close attention to my surroundings, particularly when I get home.
These experiences all happened 20 plus years ago in the home that I grew up in. My sister and I and both of our friends, we always felt a bit of a sense of dread originating from the side of the upstairs where the guest room was. When going upstairs, there was a hallway where if you went to the right it led to the game room and the guest room and the bathroom, and if you went to the left it led to our bedrooms. Oftentimes at night, usually right after dusk, the lights in the hallway would just turn off by themselves. I remember hanging out in the game room often, and I recall the hallway lights just turning off. Upon investigating, the actual light switches were turned off too. This would happen even when nobody was home, and to this day, I sometimes have nightmares of that hallway and the lights going out, leaving me alone and vulnerable in the pitch-black darkness. Though, in reality, the lights in the game room never went off on their own, and neither did lights in the other parts of the house, so there was still some light, I guess. The closet in the guest room was odd too. My sister refused to go near it, in fact. She said that she was terrified of it, especially at night. The cats also refused to go near it. In fact, they refused to go near the guest room altogether. In one instance, a friend forcibly carried one of our cats into the guest room, and she was absolutely terrified, fur standing on end and hissing and everything. She clawed my friend and escaped away from the guest room as quickly as possible. There were also often black widows just hiding in there as well, and the black widows acted a bit strangely. I remember my mum spraying about 4 or 5 as they walked out of the closet, running towards us aggressively. I've encountered a lot of black widows since then, and never seen any act like that. But they're just normally shy and non-aggressive. The exterminators weren't sure why so many black widows came from that closet too. It was an interior room without any vents and windows, and only one wall was an exterior wall. We didn't have them in any other part of the house too, except maybe the garage every once in a while. Maybe I should omit the Black Widow incident, since it can be explained by the mundane, but it fit a pattern of just odd things originating around that guest room. Sometimes when I was home alone at night, I would hear downstairs someone going through the flatware in one of the kitchen drawers. Sometimes they would be disturbed if I examined the drawers after hearing it. Sometimes the cats would be downstairs, and when this happened they were always in a deep sleep, like they didn't hear the noise at all. It happened so often that eventually I just ignored it, and only after moving out did I think how strange it was. There were a few more frightening experiences, but the most frightening to me personally was one time right around dusk when I was going to the bathroom in the guest room. I was at an age where I didn't want to share the bathroom with my sister anymore. So I was home alone, and I always had a bad habit of just locking doors, so I had locked it. I was in the middle of doing my business when the door handle to the bathroom just started violently jiggling, like someone was frantically trying to get in. It must have lasted a few seconds too, and then just suddenly stopped. It wasn't a normal kind of jiggling too. It was as if someone who was seriously disturbed was doing it. I can't imagine a sane person jiggling a door handle like that anyway. There was just something unnatural and frightening about the way the door handle was moving. I was frozen in fear for a couple of minutes and asked if someone was there, and there was no response. I eventually worked up the courage to open the door, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. I immediately called my parents, who called the police, who came and did a thorough search of the home. And of course, they found nothing, and all the doors and the windows were locked, and the alarm was on, and it was set, and they basically said that it was impossible for an intruder to have gotten in. In another instance, too, I was downstairs playing some video games, and I was home alone with my sister, and she flew downstairs white as a sheet and told me that she'd just seen a red orb about the size of a golf ball just flying through her room. Not quite in a random pattern, too, but almost as if it had some sort of intelligence to it. She said that it resembled a laser pointer dot, but it was a three-dimensional sphere.